Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the fulfilling work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit servicenow.com.
Support your immune system with Airborne's most complete immune support formula yet. Airborne's delicious effervescent tablets are packed with 7 powerful ingredients to fill the holes your immune system may have, so that you can enjoy those unmissable moments in your life. Learn more at airbornecomplete.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and if you're happy to stay awake for an hour, here's the latest episode of the Film Stories podcast.
And I'm going to bed.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
In movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Film Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew, as always. That's absolutely everything you need to know about me. The aim of the podcast, though, is given away by its title. I'm here to talk of the stories of films, and I tend to talk about production stories, development stories, release stories, marketing stories, all the ingredients, really, that go towards making the films that we know and sometimes love. Just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. The films I tend to cover on this podcast, they lean more towards the mainstream than anything else. They're films I'm interested in or invested in to some degree. I try not to do snark. I try not to punch down. This podcast is a celebration of cinema and a real appreciation that somehow, in the midst of everything, films manage to get made. In each episode, I cover the stories of 2 different movies, and I think that's enough preamble, isn't it? Let's get on with the first of them. As always, I'm going to set things up with a trailer from the film involved, and I'll come to the story of it, the other side of this.
I think what we have here in Hollywood is high art. It's
party time, sparkle time!
If you could go anywhere in the whole world, where would you go?
I always want to be part of something bigger.
Yes!
Let's go!
Something that lasts, that means something.
You know, when I first moved to LA,
I got your face tattooed on my back.
you know what signs on all the doors read? No actors or dogs allowed. I changed that.
Morning!
Good job for you. I'll do anything.
That's the cocksucker they sent to screw us.
This bitch is stealing the scene right from under me. She's icing her nipples so they perk up through her dress.
I ain't icing my nipples. This is natural.
That then was an extract from the trailer for 2022's Babylon, written and directed by Damien Chazelle and starring, deep breath, Brad Pitt, Margot Robbie, Diego Calva, Gene Smart, Yovan Adepo, Lee Jun Lee, PJ Byrne, Lucas Haas, Olivia Hamilton, Max Minghella, Rory Scovel, Catherine Waterston, Tobey Maguire. I mean, it's a very, very long list if I was to read everyone. I will mention Eric Roberts, Samara Weaving, I'll put Flea in there, Olivia Wilde, basically a cast list that seems to never end. Now, the story of Babylon goes back all the way in Damien Chazelle's mind to 2009, really, that was when he first came up with the idea for the film, when he really tried to pitch it and push it forward. But a little bit of scene setting really before that, because I've covered 2 of Damien Chazelle's films on this podcast before. That we had Whiplash in 2014 and La La Land in 2016. Now, ahead of Whiplash, Whiplash wasn't supposed to be the first film that he made, and he was exploring the idea of Babylon even before he got success with Whiplash. Whiplash, a tremendous film. Whiplash, in the end, if you've not listened to the previous podcast, he made as a short film in 2013. He basically made an extract of the movie to raise awareness and raise the funding to be able to make it as a feature. Off the back of 2016's La La Land, though, I mean, he had an Oscar success and also he had a box office hit. He channeled that into 2018's First Man, starring Ryan Gosling and Claire Foy. That one, I mean, it cost around 70 million to make and grossed just over 100 million at the box office. It also became very briefly embroiled in a very strange little spat with the then US president and now convicted felon Donald Trump. But it continued to build the currency for Damien Chazelle that he could deliver really impressive films that also crossed over into something audiences wanted to watch. And so it got to the point where he started to move towards his absolute love letter to Hollywood, to the early years of Hollywood, this film called Babylon. And he channeled some of it into La La Land originally, that when he first presented the idea of Babylon to his producing partner Matthew Plouffe back in 2019, it was just too early at that stage and there were other things that they needed to put their attention towards. And in fact, as the website North by Northwestern reported, even back in 2009, Damien Chazelle had these huge binders full of details and research about all these old Hollywood icons and how do you fashion that into a workable screenplay and into a workable film. That was going to be the challenge. It's clear that this was going to need a large cast. It would also need significant resources to bring it to the screen as well. Who was really going to take a chance on something like that? Now, the pair, Matthew Plouffe and Damien Chazelle, would be exchanging ideas for years as they continue to build up their careers. And in fact, there were said to have been around 600 pages worth of text messages between them as they bounced these ideas backwards and forwards. For Chazelle, as he continued to build this, though, I mean, he explained to the Los Angeles Times that sometimes I don't outline at all, but with Babylon, everything was sort of methodical because it was so big and architectural and sort of daunting. And he said, I did an outline. Then I did many, many drafts of that outline and it became a kind of 50, 60, 70 page treatment. And Chazelle said we would get matched responses to every draft. And once it felt ready, only then did I move to a script. This script was not going to be on the short side, but the putting it together was clearly both a challenge and also fun. And as Plouffe would say, it was just this daily back and forth, falling in love with the time period and building the characters. And he said watching Damien Chazelle's brain work and building the outline to the script was the most fun I've had building this movie, creating what he described as this wild circus. Now, the pair developed it independently, not uncommon there. In fact, they had no stars or any talent attached as they were starting to put this all together. And it was an organic construction, really. And again, a few of those ideas ended up in La La Land, but the $300 million plus gross of La La Land certainly did Chazelle no harm when it came to bringing what became the film Babylon to market. And it was in July of 2009, several months after the release of First Man, that most of us first got wind of the project at all. We were told by the Hollywood trade press that Damien Chazelle had written a script, and at that stage, the script was out to market with the idea that Chazelle would, understandably, direct as well as he'd done his last few scripts. And it was a case of studios bidding if they wanted the film. Well, they did want the film. That a couple of the studios who were heavily franchise-driven didn't apparently, from what I can work out, put in any kind of offer. So Disney primarily. This was never going to be a Disney project, as anyone who's watched the end result will know it's not a Disney project. But there was a lot of interest around Hollywood, not least for a Hollywood story. I mean, Hollywood films tend to do quite well at Academy Awards as well, and studios like winning Academy Awards. It was Lionsgate who were said to be the early favourites. Lionsgate had backed and distributed La La Land, and so was said to be in pole position. And as the trades were reporting, the film at that point was described as, quote, an original drama set in period Hollywood at a point when movies were turning into talkies. At that point in the summer of 2019, Emma Stone was already being mentioned to be one of the stars of the film. Again, understandable. Her performance in La La Land was a real standout. And, I mean, there'd been some talk that Babylon was also going to be a musical, which it wasn't a musical, but it was quite mysterious when word of the film first came out. It was Deadline in the end who called it a bold auteur piece with a significant budget. And as 2019 moved on, I mean, Brad Pitt's name was soon in the mix as well. It turned out that the project just looked a little bit too expensive for Lionsgate's tastes in the end. I mean, the film was going to cost, $80-90 million, less tax breaks just to make the thing. And then the promotion of it was going to be really difficult as well. It wasn't a franchise movie. It wasn't a sequel. It was from a standing start, a big film, but a big film of which awareness of all parts of it would need to be built up from scratch. It was Paramount Pictures who swooped in to pick it up, though. And this was at a time when, I mean, Paramount had been enjoying success off... I mean, Rocketman had been a success for Paramount at this stage. And it was looking round for projects like this. It had just snapped up the Bee Gees biopic, which only now is filming, actually, many, many years later. And so it was looking for particular projects, and it snapped up Babylon, stumping up the budget for the film, also knowing that what it was likely to get here it was certainly going to be R-rated. Paramount executives read the script. They knew what they were getting. It was also likely to be on the long side. Spoiler, it was on the long side. And at the point where it was announced that Paramount had acquired the film, it was also tied in with a Christmas Day 2021 limited release for it, ahead of a broader, wider release in January 2022. That would qualify the film for the Oscars. Paramount knew exactly what it was doing there. Interestingly, also, it came to fruition at a point where there was another film about the golden era of Hollywood with some profile being put together. That would be David Fincher's film Mank, which he made for Netflix based on a screenplay written by his late father. And so you had these two films, not quite set in the same era. There's some overlap, but Babylon is a much broader canvas. But also they were getting significant funding, really, from Hollywood just to exist in the first place. Now, the Emma Stone and Brad Pitt links. Well, Pitt was working on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when he first got the script, and he read the script there, as did Leonardo DiCaprio. Now, DiCaprio didn't take on a part in Babylon, but the script did coincidentally get to a friend of his, Tobey Maguire, who would sign up. Now, Stone was, I mean, at this point, she was busy. She was working on Zombieland Double Tap. She was starring in Cruella for Disney. But still, Brad Pitt signed on the dotted line in 2019. Emma Stone was not far behind. And then there was this exhaustive process that had been going on for basically the lead role in the movie, who would have to traverse the many times and eras that Babylon was going to explore. Now, that would go to pretty much an unknown, Diego Calva. And this 2-year process was quite intense. It involved Damien Chazelle going through what he described as hundreds of thousands of headshots to look for a relative unknown to take the lead in his film. There's something in Diego Calva's eyes that appealed to Damien Chazelle, and so then it was several auditions over Zoom and quite a long process before he landed the role. He did go to Los Angeles for the first time to meet Damien Chazelle and to manage to land this significant role in a very, very star-laden production. And so, I mean, it was pretty much full steam ahead until the pandemic came along. Remember that? And so by the time we got to March 2020, so many of these film stories are having to dig around this at the moment. Production would be knocked back. There was no way that the planned shooting of the movie in the summer of 2020 was going to happen the way things were panning out. So much uncertainty around Hollywood as well. Could you commit to any kind of film production? What precautions would you have to take? All of those things of which you're oh so familiar. And I mean, the fact that the film had to be delayed just had knock-on effects. In particular, the fact that Emma Stone now had commitments elsewhere and she had to drop out of the movie altogether. together. Now, not a bad substitute came in. Charlize Theron was soon on board, quickly thereafter actually, and her character was slightly changed, fictionalised a little bit more once Theron came in and took on that role. Brad Pitt was able to stick it out. I mean, his commitments meant that he could hold that role in Babylon through pretty much thick and thin at this point. And in fact, Damien Chazelle would reflect to Business Insider with Brad, he was the first one attached to the project and stuck with it, even when we had to shut it down and wait for a while to shoot. And Chazelle did reflect that it's hard to imagine many other people other than him doing this particular role. He was particularly pleased that Brad Pitt had managed to stick this one out. Now, one story that came around involving the pre-production of Babylon, notwithstanding all the location scouting and the extensive production design work that was required, was the fact that Damien Chazelle basically filmed a 2-hour version of the film at his home. Now, this was as a result. I mean, filming had been originally set to start in the middle of 2020. For fairly obvious reasons, it didn't. And what Chazelle did to prepare himself and also his lead actor, Diego Calva, for the film was he brought in help from his wife, Olivia Hamilton, who takes on the role of Ruth Adler in the movie as well. And with her, Diego Calva and his phone, Damien Chazelle shot this 2-hour version of the film. Now, to do that, as Diego Calva would talk about with the Los Angeles Times, he moved in with Chazelle and Olivia Hamilton. And for this 10-day period, they rehearsed the film. And as Calva said, it was kind of like summer camp. We'd wake up every morning and do scenes. Olivia played all the other characters and Damien recorded everything. And by day 11, basically, Damien had the whole movie. In the end, the filming of Babylon was basically put back by around a year. In fact, he wouldn't start shooting until July of 2021. And a few weeks ahead of that, the Hollywood trades were enthusiastically reporting about the film and its burgeoning cast list, reporting that names such as Tobey Maguire and Olivia Wilde and Phoebe Tonkin and Spike Jonze were all joining the ballooning cast, and that they were going to be playing fictional characters, but characters inspired by real-life Hollywood figures. That massive binder, the binders of research that Damien Chazelle had done, had been fashioned into a screenplay that, I mean, it didn't exactly go to biographical levels on when dealing with the characters in the film. He put a little bit of a fictional edge on there, but I mean, students of classic Hollywood will find some of them are very, very close to their real life counterparts. Filming began then, July the 1st, 2021, in the Los Angeles area, as you might expect. And the production design was down to the work of Florencia Martin, who cut her teeth in the art department on the TV show Mad Men. And her first production design credit was fairly recent at that point as well, Paul Thomas Anderson's film Licorice Pizza. It was Linus Sandgren who was shooting the film as well. He'd shot the last 2 films at that point for Damien Chazelle, First Man and La La Land, and the pair elected to use 35mm film. They didn't want to shoot this on digital, and in fact Sandgren would talk quite a lot in interviews following the release of the movie about how he played with the exposure of the 35mm film as well, and was just doing things that in a strange way were a little bit harder to do with digital. They knew they had to shoot it as a wide CinemaScope film as well. They wanted to capture the era and the story, and CinemaScope seemed perfect for it. And, I mean, as Linus Sandgren would say, I mean, it was just, quote, a crazy story. He said Damien found inspiration from the absurd humour in this tale, and we wanted the camera to be in the absurdity, moving among the ludicrous events. And he said everything I did was intended to be expressive, to fit the roller coaster of events, as well as the dramatic contrasts and turns in the characters' lives. Among the locations that were used around the Hollywood area, well, they included the exterior of Paramount Pictures, the former home of William Randolph Hearst, lots and lots of real Los Angeles as well. They were deliberately keeping the soundstage work to a minimum, just the points really where the action of the story itself takes place, well, on a soundstage. This is a film about making movies, and there are several sequences of, as you would expect, making movies, many of which were shot in the Kinoscape studio that Damien Chazelle had written into the screenplay to be the heart of a lot of this movie-making mayhem, really. And so that studio was built on location, and it was built a little bit out so you could see the desert in the background as well. And in all, I mean, it's quite a physical production. Around 120 sets were needed for the making of the film. Some of those were film sets within film sets as well. And when they did go on to modern working day sound stages, they had a little bit of work just to disguise all the modern signage on there. Also things like hiding the air conditioning units too. For Diego Calva in particular, I mean, this was quite a thing to step onto the set of. And I mean, he described how on his first day of shooting, he found himself on the set of an old-time Western, one of the films made within the film. And he just said, we're not inside a car or a house or something. And in fact, this particular sequence was shot just outside of Los Angeles. And he just described how it was 800 extras with horses, with explosions, with Brad Pitt over here, Margot Robbie over there. And he said, I see this film crew shooting a movie. He'd also reflect to the Los Angeles Times on one particular infamous sequence in the film. If you've not had the pleasure, I'm not going to spoil it, but he just said, I have never been surrounded by so many naked people in my life. And he talked about how there were background artists, dancers, some actual porn stars, musicians, and he said at least 300 people in costumes and makeup, all sweaty and dancing. It was impossible to not feel the energy, he reflected. I believe it's that particular sequence as well that required the use of a fair number of merkins. If you are familiar with merkins, you will know what I'm talking about. If not, put it into Google and then just scrub your internet history for a little bit, probably to be on the safe side. The film would wrap up its production on October the 21st of 2021. That this had taken just over 3 months to get in the can. And it was at that point that Damien Chazelle's producer gave him that printout of all 600 of the text messages that they'd sent, 600 pages of the text messages that they'd sent during the building and the production of the film. Now, with the knock-on of the year delay in shooting, so it had a similar knock-on to the actual theatrical release of the movie. It was just being put back basically a calendar year, that it was now going to be debuting in American cinemas on Christmas Day 2022. It was going to get a wider release in the first week of January 2023. And there was still confidence. There was still the idea of building this towards some kind of awards run as well. And so the first trailer for the movie, I mean, the trailer came out really quite late, actually, September 2022. And when you think about the fact that this was a film that needed to build an audience from absolute scratch, it was quite surprising that the promotion was left relatively late. That the trailer launched at the Toronto International Film Festival. Damien Chazelle was there doing a Q&A as well. And so, I mean, it was just pushed particularly hard as well. And there was a feeling that there was something of The Wolf of Wall Street about it. The Wolf of Wall Street had launched its promotion relatively late in the day as well. And then the Paramount publicity machine just went full on into action. The out came making of featurettes, a couple more trailers as well. Blanket publicity for the film, really. And so it was now down to the fact, would people like it? Would people turn up to see it? The initial critical reaction to the movie, though, was just all over the place. I would suggest it remains all over the place. We're talking, a year and a half after the film's original release. The running time of 3 hours, just north of 3 hours, wasn't cited as a problem for say. Just the fact that so much is crammed into that 3 hours that it's weird to call a film like that non-stop, but it's not one that takes many breaths in that 3 hour running time as well. And that really earned it quite a lot of criticism, actually. Quite a few critics really pushed back against the fact that it just pummels you to a large degree. Hugely respected critics as well, they just weren't really going for it. However, the people who really did go for it were absolutely all over it. Really, really, really loved it. The problem was that Paramount was looking to build an awards campaign for the film, and clearly the response to the movie was polarising, that this was not a very, very obvious Oscar contender, just because it just seemed as many people didn't like it as liked it. So I mean, how do you present that to the world, and how do you hope you get the awards that you require that would bolster the gross of the film? Paramount did indeed launch the movie on Christmas Day 2022 in the US, and that weekend ran 23rd to the 25th of December 2022. And it was a point where cinema, as it is now to still a degree, remained in some degree of flux. And so it arrived after, say, for instance, Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans hadn't even made it to $10 million after 7 weeks on release. Sam Mendes' Empire of Light hadn't even crossed $1 million after 3 weeks. Just this general feeling that films aimed at, inverted commas, grown-ups were really struggling. The Banshees of Inisherin had tremendous reviews after 10 weeks in US cinemas, hadn't crossed $10 million at the box office. The films that were just about breaking through, well, Avatar: The Way of Water certainly was, that on its second week of release, $63 million it was its second weekend gross. And so that was very much the exception to the rule, that even a big blockbuster like Black Adam hadn't done quite the numbers Warner Brothers had hoped. Black Panther: Wakanda Forever was tracking about half the numbers of the first Black Panther. That had been out for 7 weeks and had only crawled over $400 million, which is a lot of money for me, but wasn't an awful lot for Disney, really, with the expectation of it had for that film. There were three big films opening that particular Christmas weekend. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, really good sequel that is. Even if you usually dismiss things like that, do seek that out. That's a far better sequel than many people initially realised they were getting. That opened with $18 million. The Whitney Houston biopic fell hard, $4.7 million opening weekend. Babylon, $3.6 million, and the screen average was not good. It was $3.6 million on over 3,000 screens, over 3,000 cinemas. Screen average just over $1,000. Really poor for such a big film and such a heavily promoted film as well. And Paramount's alarm bells must have been going off at some volume. The budget for the movie had been about $80 million. And then, of course, there's the price of promoting the thing as well. The bills were mounting up for it. And the hope was that when the award nominations came around, they might just at the very least give it a shot in the arm. And yet, pretty much nothing. You look down the Academy Award nominations and you will not find Babylon's name in there anywhere. That it interested a few of the Assorted Film Critics Association. It certainly picked up a fair amount of nominations, but this was not doing the business. It was not hitting any of the targets really that Paramount was needing it to do. Now, it left cinemas with a global box office take of $63 million, but let's just go back to how it was doing in the US, because on its second weekend, its gross was down to $2.6 million and it was down to 5th place. It crawled over $10 million after 2 weeks, which, given the star power and given the cost of the film, had to be ranked as a disappointment. Megan, or Meg Mithrigan, opened the week after and did a $30 million opening weekend, even as Babylon fell below The Whale in the top 10 at the US box office. And, I mean, it was pretty soon gone. After 4 weeks, it had dropped out of the top 10 altogether. Again, lots of films were struggling. Lots of films continued to struggle. And Babylon was absolutely a massive swing. Most people going into it appreciated that. But I mean, it was still something of a surprise that it was deemed a swing and miss, if you like. The total gross of the film did not cover the negative cost of the movie, and the gross that comes through box office deals doesn't all go to the studio anyway. And so Paramount was looking at red ink, and those Hollywood trades were in again, just speculating how much has Paramount Pictures lost on this particular film. The aftermath of it, it's a film actually that's done all right on home formats, that Paramount elected to put it out on a 4K disc, and it continues to get some degree of interest. And as Damien Chazelle noted to Business Insider, he said, "I knew the movie was going to ruffle some feathers and get some people mad, and I think that's good. More movies should do that." But he also knew that his career was going to pay a price for Babylon not hitting the mark of his previous movies, that it was now going to be a lot harder to get his projects off the ground. I mean, generally the way of the world. It's just like, if you have one one that doesn't quite work, then you're sort of in trouble. Now, in December 2022, incidentally, around the time of Babylon's release, Chazelle and Olivia Hamilton had signed a first-look deal with Paramount Pictures, which gave Paramount basically first dibs on whatever Chazelle was coming up with next. And it's only now that Chazelle has another project up and running, which is set to release in 2025. Now, that's a 3-year gap from Babylon. So there's a 4-year gap from First Man to Babylon, but then there was the COVID pandemic and lockdowns in the way. Before that, 2-year gaps, and he was making films quite prolifically. Here had been a bit of a bump in the road, and Chazelle did say, I won't get a budget of Babylon size anytime soon. And he said, certainly in financial terms, Babylon didn't work at all. However, for the people who really love Babylon and really like what it was trying to do, Babylon works really well. And I have to say, I am a paid-up fan of the film, that if you're looking for a film that is completely out there, that just is uncompromising, really, in what it wants to do and how it wants to do it, and also a film that opens with an elephant going to the toilet. There aren't many big movies of this ilk that do things like that. Does it work? Well, Paramount might say no. I say yes. I'll leave you to make your own mind up. The story of it, though, I mean, it took, nearly 15 years from those first conversations to bring to the screen. I'm sort of glad it made it.
Oh my God, it's the coolest thing ever. Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? Well, check this out. It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic, famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. Seriously. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
And that brings me to the halfway point of this latest episode of Film Stories. As always, thank you so much for listening and thank you for your time. I'm going to do my parish notices now, if that's all the same with you. Firstly then, if you like this podcast and don't mind giving it a bit of extra support beyond your ears, and I'm very, very grateful for your ears, there are 3 ways in particular that are of real help. Firstly, if you want to put money in the pot and financially support what we do, if you go to patreon.com/SimonBrew, SimonBrew, I've learned to spell my own name. If you put some money in there, then you get the podcast early and ad-free pretty much every week. And you also find the gossip, basically, of what we're up to behind the scenes as well. Costing you absolutely nothing, meanwhile, is to subscribe to this podcast at your podcast home of choice. Thank you to everyone who does that. And then another thing, if you can leave ideally a hugely positive review, stuff like that really I know I bang on about this a bit. Stuff like that really does help independent podcasts, though. I'm hugely grateful again for everyone who's done that for us. It makes a real difference. I don't understand algorithms. I don't understand why. I just know it makes a real difference. I'm also working away on new issues of our print magazines. The latest issue of Film Junior is in production as we speak. I'm aiming to release that just towards the end of July. That's going up for pre-order soon at store.filmstories.co.uk. That is a film magazine, a print film magazine for under 15s. They also write good chunks of it as well, and God bless them for doing it. That's store.filmstories.co.uk. Also going up for pre-order shortly is issue 51 of Film Stories magazine, the UK's biggest print film magazine, 168 pages. The new issue is out at the very start of August, going up for pre-order shortly. But I think that's enough of my parish notices. I'm going to move on to the second of the 2 films I'm talking about in this episode of Film Stories. As always, I'm going to set it up with a clip from the trailer. Come to the story, the other side of this.
This is your last careers lesson. So does anyone have a realistic career plan? Tyson, Denzel, what about you?
YouTubers.
I keep telling you all, you gotta keep things real. Jamie. Jamie New.
Me?
What do you want to be?
A performer.
For a minute there, I had such high hopes for you.
What is wrong with our boy?
You remember when we was little and we used to play dress up? Well, for me, that's a game I don't want to stop playing.
I'm done with this. I wanted a son so badly. I got you.
The cold, empty mornings I don't think I've got a dad anymore.
You've done nothing wrong, Jamie. You never did.
So, why do you want to be on stage?
I want to be a drag queen. Because it's all I ever dream of. And when I close my eyes, it's all I can see.
And that was a clip from the film version of Everybody's Talking About Jamie, which came out in 2021, directed by Jonathan Butterell, screenplay by Tom McRae, based on the stage musical Everybody's Talking About Jamie by Dan Gillespie Sells, Tom McRae, which in turn is based on the documentary Jamie Drag Queen at 16 by Jenny Popplewell and Jamie Campbell. So, the story of this goes back to Jamie Campbell, as I just mentioned. And in his teens, his desire to wear a dress to his school prom at the age of 15. Now, this innocuous moment in someone's life, really, has turned into a global sensation. And that particular story was, in turn, turned into a documentary on BBC Three called Jamie Drag Queen at 16 in 2011. Now, Jamie had sent off the pitch for his story as a film, but it was the documentary that sparked into life first. Amongst those watching the documentary was Jonathan Butterell, a theatre director. It comes from a working class background from the northeast of England and could also just tie into the relationship between Jamie and his mum that was really at the heart of the documentary and at the heart of Jamie's story as well. So Jonathan Butterell was interested in this. In fact, it was he who would approach the Sheffield Theatre, the Crucible, about possibly putting this on stage. But he'd also taken a call from Michael Ball. Yep, that one. The musical Michael Ball, a man who has never appeared in nearly 400 episodes of this podcast. This is your time, Michael Ball. This is what you've been waiting for. And he advised Jonathan Butterell that there are a couple of people he was in touch with who were trying to write something and were after a bit of help. So one of those people was Tom McRae, a writer who'd previously written for Doctor Who. It's the first time I encountered Tom McRae's work. And then Dan Gillespie Sells on the music side of things. So Butterell agreed to meet them. And the three of them, they hit it off quickly to the point where they became a creative team that stayed together to this day. So we're talking, it's gone over more than a decade of working together. Crucially, all from working class backgrounds, all went to state schools in the UK as well. And so between them, they developed the stage musical that would debut at the Crucible Theatre in Sheffield when the snooker wasn't on in February 2017. And then the show would transfer to the West End of London in November 2017. This was an era where a lot of musicals were really quite serious, and here was an absolute full-on blast of fun that resonated with critics and quickly found an audience as well. And word of Everybody's Talking About Jamie began to spread from that point, and the story would be accelerating. Now, a crucial creative decision at the heart of the stage musical was to effectively create their own Jamie to be at the heart of it. That they didn't want to tell the absolute story of Jamie Campbell. They wanted a bit of distance between their Jamie and the real Jamie. And so the Jamie you see in the stage musical and also in the film we're going to talk about is called Jamie New. They also switched the setting from County Durham in the UK to Sheffield. That's where Jonathan Butterell's from Sheffield. And so he wanted to bring it a little bit close to home. They also, I think it's an interesting creative decision they made. They decided not to have an outright villain in their story as well. And clearly all of this worked to the point where within months conversations were underway about a film version of Everybody's Talking About Jamie. And so us on our side of the fence, we first heard of this in May of 2018. The news was revealed that Warp Films, itself a company in the Sheffield area, had backed the film Tyrannosaur, an incredible film that is. Warp Films was developing a movie of the stage play. Warp Films is also behind This Is England as well. And what was unusual about this is the development of a feature film was basically going to take the creatives behind the musical with it. That Dan Gillespie Sells was going to come in and do the music, Tom McRae was going to work on the book and the screenplay, and Jonathan Butterell, who hadn't directed a feature film before, was going to make the jump to the big screen. Well, in theory, as we're about to come to. Now, once this was up and running, there was a period of development. There were also some notable hurdles here as well, not least the casting of the piece, because the lead character in Everybody's Talking About Jamie is 16 years old, and the original stage show by this point had been going for, a couple of years, a year and a half or so, and it meant that they couldn't really bring across the original young Sheffield stage cast to the film, which would have been an ideal. They knew the part, they knew the role, and they knew really what they were trying to get at with the work too. But what they didn't want to do was have one of those films where you had 33-year-olds or something like that playing as 16-year-olds. They knew that they had to do some recasting here. And so a broadcasting call went out for the feature film, and unsurprisingly, the interest in it was sizable. And so I'm going to zero in on two of them who, as it turned out, got the roles. One of those was a young actor by the name of Lauren Patel. Now, she was fairly raw at this point. She knew she wanted to be an actor when she was older, but at this stage, she was just looking to do auditions. She wanted the experience of auditioning. And so she toddled along to an audition for Everybody's Talking About Jamie, not really knowing what it was. Was it an independent film? Was it going straight to TV? I mean, she was in the midst of juggling drama school. She was sitting her A-levels. She was doing all sorts of assessments. Then she was having to bomb it down to London for the Jamie audition as well. And so she was a little bit distant from what it was, really, even though she was putting her heart and soul clearly into the audition itself. Now, one person who absolutely knew what they were gunning for was Max Harwood, who was auditioning for the role of Jamie New. And another young actor who, as young actors do, was going through the process of auditions and rejections and really having to get to grips with that. One of the things that he said he took solace from was a video that Brie Larson actually put out. And Brie Larson in this video talks about all the roles that she didn't get, because she's got an Oscar, because she's been in like $1 billion grossing movie. There's the perception that Brie Larson is this massive success, and she was keen to get across that it hadn't always been so, and that there was stuff that hadn't worked out for her. And Max Harwood was one of those who just looked at that and really took some solace from it. Still, he absolutely went for the audition. That he was, I mean, he gave it everything. For instance, he never worn heels, but he agreed to wear them on the spot for the audition. And Jonathan Buttrell, for one, was just completely taken by how he just didn't hold back. He treated it almost as if it was his only chance in the world, and completely went for it, which proved pivotal in the end in him landing the lead role. Meanwhile, let's go back to Lauren Patel, because she was going back to London and then she brought back to do a full day of work with Max Harwood. Still not really appreciating how close she was getting until it got to that stage. She'd done a few auditions and conversations for this, and she just recognised that they can't actually be doing this with that many people. She's got to be in with a reasonable chance. And so she did her work with Harwood. She went back home, and by this point, I mean, the process had been going on. She'd had a birthday. She was now 17 years old. She was still technically under the stewardship of her dad as well. He was counted as her chaperone, and so he was the one that the news was going to go to, and she was actually in a media studies revision class when she got a message through on her phone, and it was a thumbs up emoji from her dad, which was quickly followed up with a very teary phone call. She had the co-lead role in the film. Meanwhile, the funding was bringing together pots of cash from an assortment of different places. This still wasn't going to be a really expensive film, but it was going to be scaling up a little bit, courtesy of money that was put in from Regency Enterprises, from Film 4, and New Regency came in as well. And then there was the announcement in June 2019, so we're pretty much a year on already from the film originally being announced by Wart Films, that 20th Century Studios was going to be distributing and putting some heft behind the movie. 20th Century Studios at this point was, I think it was just about clinging on as Fox, but it wasn't going to be Fox for long. This was as the Disney purchase was reaching its conclusion, and this was one of the projects that Disney was going to be picking up as part of its purchase. It was clearly a project that was more centric to the UK market. Disney hasn't actually done an awful lot of that, to be fair, either. And still, it kept the project going, which it didn't have to do. I mean, Disney had also, for instance, Fox had entered into a 3-picture deal with Locksmith Animation in the UK, and at the point that the Disney-Fox deal was concluded, that deal was very swiftly and prematurely ended. So, I mean, I think it's pretty well known that when Disney bought up Fox, that around 1,000 projects or so in various stages of development just went into turnaround or bit the dust or had to find homes somewhere else. This was one of those that survived. There weren't many of them. The announcement then in June 2019 that the film had secured distribution, well, that was great. And now shooting could take place over the summer of 2019 with a view of an October 2020 release date, assuming there was no act of God or anything that would get in the way of that. We got the first teaser shots from the film in May 2020, incidentally, when a cinema release was still very much in the mind. But by then, the cast had really come together as well. A couple of key signings too, Sarah Lancashire being one of them. Sarah Lancashire's work is primarily on television, but I think it's safe to say she's widely regarded as one of the UK's finest actors, not least off the wonderful TV series Happy Valley. And so she was taking on the role of Jamie's mother. Sharon Horgan was coming in. Shobna Gulati was one, I think she's the only one who came across from the stage show to take a role in the film. Adil Akhtar, Ralph Ineson taking on the not very sympathetic role of Jamie's dad. And then adding an extra bit of star wattage to it all, Richard E. Grant agreed to take on another key role in the film, a drag queen in the movie and a pivotal drag queen who's a mentor of sorts to Jamie. Richard E. Grant would tell me that this was, in the first half of 2019, and how he was just coming off a 6-month award run for the film Can You Ever Forgive Me? And he was conscious in Can You Ever Forgive Me that he played a gay man in spite of not being gay himself. And so he was wary. I mean, the world was turning fairly quickly, and he was wary that, should he be playing a drag queen? Was that right for him to do? Because in real life, he wasn't. He'd never done anything like this. And so he questioned Jonathan Buttrell about it, and it was Buttrell who just said, no, absolutely, you should do this. And so Richard E. Grant locked himself away with 11 seasons, he told me, of RuPaul's Drag Race to just give him a flavour of things, that he burned through 11 seasons of that show in 3 weeks. Then he worked with David Hoyle, a northern drag artist as well, to refine the look, to refine the character, and to refine really how he was going to approach the part. David Hoyle does turn up in a montage in the movie. And then obviously rehearsals were going to be required. This was going to be a screen musical before filming would get underway in the summer of 2019. Now, just ahead of that, Jonathan Buttrell had brought Max Harwood and Lauren Patel together, told them to go and spend time together, sent them off to lunch. They had they went off to Nando's and nattered. And they really, what he charged them with is find the on-screen friendship off-screen. Go and put in the work now, which they duly did, and would actually end up living in the same apartment block for the duration of the shoot as well. So let's go to that shoot. Summer of 2019. Now, Dearlands Avenue in Sheffield, it's not a road I know particularly well, and it's not one particularly well known either to cinema goers, really. That it plays home to a huge outdoor sequence towards the end of the movie, and deliberately, it was picked in part because it's an area of the UK just really not used to seeing a big film production like this turn up on its doorstep. And for this huge musical sequence that they're doing, they needed 3,000 extras to turn out. Well, the production couldn't afford that. It was going to rely on the goodwill of the local community. And as Jonathan Buttrell told me, they just put out a call to the local community telling them to, quote, come as their most fabulous selves. It would be fair to say that the residents of Sheffield did not let him down. They turned up in their thousands, and this really huge scale musical number was shot, the logistics of which are just baffling to me. And then at the end of it, Jonathan Buttrell was just like, well, I need another shot of that. I need to do a take 2, to which the film's first AD turned to him and just said, you can't shift 3,000 people. You can't move them back. And Buttrell just replied, I'm a Sheffield lad, just watch me, and duly did, and got his second take. He was keen to film in Sheffield because, this was a community he knew. It mattered to him. They didn't want to even do soundstage work in London or anything like that. So they used a real comprehensive school in Rotherham for school sequences. They created a film studio of their own, actually, in Doncaster. They knew that the locality was important, and they knew that the locality was going to be supportive as well. What they didn't initially have was the scale. And it was only when people like Film 4 and New Regency came in and put funds into the production that it allowed them to basically up what they were trying to do with the film. You had Harwood and Patel in that same apartment block during filming, supporting each other. In fact, I think they told me that they would go back after a tough day and just watch Chernobyl, the HBO series, just to, just cheer yourself up, crikey. Max Harwood also talked about how Sarah Lancashire was invaluable, the advice she was giving to the relatively inexperienced young performers. And she said, you just slow down. She understood film. She knew this wasn't stage. Slow down. The camera will work in a different way, and Jonathan Buttrell was finding that as well. He was enjoying the move from theatre to cinema. The idea that you had this immediacy with the actors, that you could get really close up. And I mean, with his theatre work, whenever he'd had to block and stage things, he had to consider the back row of the theatre as much as the front row. Here he could very, very particularly control what we all saw, and was enjoying that part of the process as well. Filming had wrapped up once we got into the autumn of 2019 then, and everybody's talking about Jamie was looking like it would be a pretty solid success towards the autumn of 2020. And here we go again. We're going to tell a bit of a COVID story. We've not done one since the last film on this particular episode. Because, I mean, once lockdowns happened, once COVID came along, once cinemas shut, Fox, which had been committed to a cinema release, was initially it delayed it. It moved it from October 2020 to January of 2021. It made this announcement in the middle of 2020. And so there was still this commitment to a cinema release as well, which was, it was something that all involved with the film were particularly gunning for. But then it suddenly disappeared off the release calendar by the end of 2020, and there were just, what on earth is happening to this film? And so the ecosystem of then, as you probably remember, was just as studios were starting to sell their films to streamers because they had no cinemas to show them in. They may as well just take the money at this point. It got to the point where the James Bond film No Time to Die, I think it was Apple, sounded Eon and MGM out about just bypassing a cinema release for a James Bond film. They got no shrift with that, but that's where the conversations were. In this particular case, Disney formally cancelled. Everybody's talking about Jamie's theatrical release in May of 2021 and instead sold the distribution rights to the film to Amazon. Amazon was now going to debut this on its Prime Video service on the 17th of September 2021, and it just wasn't going to get a cinema release in the UK. Now, it did get some festival release. It did debut, in fact, at the Frameline Film Festival in June of 2021. In America, actually, it did get a small number of screens. It did get theatrical out in there, but a tiny, tiny, tiny one. The response to the movie was generally pretty good as well. That, just an uplifting, fun, bright and bubbly musical at a point where, the world sort of needed stuff like that as well. It'd been a very downbeat period of life that we'd all lived through at that point, and here was a hugely positive film. They weren't rave reviews, I should acknowledge that there was some people just argued just a little bit stagey, really. It didn't go outdoors enough, but I thought there was a lot to it. I hadn't seen the stage show at that point. I thought the film was really impressive. I thought the performances were really impressive, and I just really enjoyed it. It got to the release, and ordinarily at this point in the podcast, I'd talk to you about box office and things like that, but obviously you can't talk about that because it didn't get a release, and Amazon was hardly being generous with the figures for how much it was viewed. It remains on the Prime Video service to this day. Max Harwood would tell me, though, that whole wait for the release was, quote, agonising, that they'd finished the film effectively by the end of 2019, and it was 2 years before the rest of us could see it. And he was grateful that Jonathan Buttrell brought him along to a couple of screenings so he could see it with an audience. But that agonising wait was felt by pretty much all in the production. Still, I'll leave the last word on it for just the last thoughts to Jonathan Buttrell, really. I should acknowledge that the film did pick up a couple of nominations at the British Independent Film Awards, and it got a BAFTA nomination for Outstanding British Film as well. So I do just want to name check those. But it was Jonathan Buttrell who, at the end of it all, would just reflect that this incredible 6-year journey that he'd had with this story, that in 2017 it had debuted on stage in Sheffield. 6 years later, there it was not on a big screen very often, but certainly on a screen. And I mean, really quite a thing for him to wrap his head around. It's a good film, this. It's a film that, like many that went straight to streaming when they should have had a cinema release, has had its cultural impact, I would suggest, just tempered slightly. However, it is worth seeking out. It is a blast of fun. It's a good family movie as well. I just think the musical has gone on and has been revived post lockdowns, and he's enjoying success again. I just think the film perhaps deserves another nudge as well. And that brings me to the end of this latest episode of Film Stories. As always, thank you so much for listening and thank you for your time. If I've not bored you completely, you can find more from me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Simon Brew. You can get more from the entire Film Stories project at Film Stories. If you go to facebook.com/Film Stories online, we're there. If you go to store.filmstories.co.uk, that's where you'll find our print magazines and our Blu-rays for sale. I talked about those just in the parish notices in the middle of things as well. If you go to youtube.com/Film Stories, we've got an assortment of videos and things going on there. Please subscribe there. That helps. We're trying to build that up quite a lot at the moment as well. We're at Instagram, Film Stories Magazine UK. And then if you go to our website, which is filmstories.co.uk, we are trying to prove that you can do an entertainment website that doesn't rely on clickbait, really, to work, that doesn't rely on those endless articles telling you everything you need to know about that. The thing with that is search engines don't like them, so we need your help to keep doing that. If you could give us a click and spread the word, it is hugely, hugely appreciated. Main thing, though, as always, is you all look after yourselves and take care. I thank you so much for listening and supporting Film Stories. I will be back soon with another episode. Until then, look after yourselves, folks. Thanks for your ears, and I'll be back soon. Bye-bye.